Kill or be killed, Clara. That's the only law left in this godforsaken land. The words, spoken by a dying trapper months ago, clawed at Clara's mind as she crouched behind a jagged boulder in a Montana canyon, the weight of her revolver heavy in her calloused hands. The sun bled crimson across the horizon, painting the cracked, thirsty earth in hues of fire and shadow. At 24, Clara, a Lakota woman, carried scars deeper than the lines etched into the canyon wall, scars of loss, of survival, of blood spilled to reclaim her freedom. Her dark eyes, sharp with purpose, tracked the dust trail of a Black Spurs caravan snaking through the valley below. Somewhere in those wagons was her 12-year-old brother, Tagka, the last thread tying her to a family torn apart by violence. 5 months earlier, Clara had escaped a living hell. Kidnapped at 16 during a raid on her village, she had been sold into a human trafficking ring run by the Black Spurs, a band of outlaws and corrupt settlers who preyed on Native Americans and destitute pioneers. Her captivity in a mining camp had stripped her of hope, her body battered by labor and cruelty. But Clara was no ordinary prisoner. She had watched, learned, and waited. Her chance came one moonless night when her captor, a brutish man named Silas, grew careless. With a stolen knife, she ended his life, his blood warm on her hands as she fled into the wilderness. That act of violence had freed her, but it also haunted her, a ghost that whispered in her dreams. Now, as she studied the caravan, she wondered if redemption was possible here, if she was doomed to be defined by the blood she had shed. The American West of 1876 was a land of stark beauty and starker brutality. The Montana plains stretched endlessly before her, a sea of golden grass swaying under a relentless wind, broken by jagged cliffs and the skeletal remains of abandoned homesteads. The Lakota, Clara's people, were fighting a losing battle against settlers and soldiers who carved up their sacred lands with greed and gunfire. The Black Hills, where her ancestors had communed with the spirits, were now pockmarked with mines and settler towns, their sanctity defiled. The Black Spurs thrived in this chaos, led by Amos Creed, a former cavalry officer turned outlaw whose cold ambition had destroyed Clara's world. His men, marked by the Black Spurs that gave them their name, were a plague on the land, trafficking people for profit and seizing territory for their own gain. Clara's breath caught as she counted the caravan, 3 wagons, their canvas covers flapping like tattered flags, guarded by 12 riders. Their spurs glinted in the fading light, a cruel reminder of their power. Amos Creed rode at the front, his tall frame unmistakable, his gray eyes scanning the horizon with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Clara's fingers tightened on her revolver, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and fury. Creed was the architect of her family's destruction. 8 years ago, his men had burned her village, slaughtering her parents and elder sister, Waigiag Luda, before her eyes. Tagka, only for then, had been torn from her grasp, his screams echoing as the raiders carried him away. Clara had been powerless then, a girl caught in the chaos. Now she was a ghost in the wilderness, driven by a single purpose, to find her brother and make the Black Spurs pay. Her plan was desperate but precise. She had spent weeks tracking the caravan, piecing together scraps of information from trappers, displaced natives, and a half-drunk prospector she had left tied to a tree. After he confirmed Tagka was among the captives, the Black Spurs were moving their prisoners to Ironwood, a settler town built on stolen Lakota land, where a brothel awaited its new victims. Clara's supplies were meager: a Colt revolver with 6 bullets, a knife taken from Silas, and a crude explosive crafted from gunpowder, a tin can, and burlap. She had learned to make such devices in the mining camp, where dynamite was as common as despair. If she could detonate the explosive under the lead wagon, the chaos might give her a chance to free the captives and find Tagka. The canyon was silent save for the distant creak of wagon wheels and the low murmur of the riders. Clara's palms were slick with sweat, her arms still aching from a shallow cut she had earned escaping a trapper's ambush days earlier. She was no stranger to danger, but this was different. This was personal. If she failed, Tagka would be lost forever, and her last tie to her family would vanish into the West's merciless maw. She whispered a Lakota prayer, one her mother had taught her: "Waken Tanka, guide my hand." Let my aim be true. The words felt hollow against the weight of her guilt, but they steadied her trembling hands. As the caravan drew closer, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A young girl, no older than 10, darted from behind a rock, her dark braids bouncing as she ran toward the wagons. Her beaded necklace, a Lakota design, glinted in the dying light. Clara's stomach lurched. Was she an escaped captive, desperate to reach safety? Before Clara could react, a rider spurred his horse forward, his lasso snapping through the air like a snake. The girl screamed as the rope caught her ankle, yanking her to the ground with a sickening thud. Clara's fingers tightened on her revolver, but she forced herself to stay still. A single shot would give her away, and Tagka would pay the price. The rider, a gaunt man with a scarred face, dismounted and hauled the girl to her feet. "You think you can run, little savage," he snarled, his voice carrying across the canyon. The girl spat at him, her defiance earning her a backhand that sent her sprawling into the dust. Clara's blood boiled, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint. She had seen that defiance before, in her sister, in herself. The girl's courage was a mirror, reflecting the fire that still burned in Clara's heart. Amos Creed rode forward, his cold gray eyes studying the girl like a predator sizing up prey. "Another one for Ironwood," he said, his voice smooth as oil but laced with menace. "Keep her alive. She'll fetch a good price." The riders laughed, their cruelty echoing off the canyon walls. Clara's chest tightened, memories flooding back, Creed's face illuminated by the flames of her burning village, his calm orders as her family was slaughtered. She wanted to shoot him then and there, to watch his blood soak the earth, but she held back. Tagka was her priority, and she couldn't risk him for revenge. The caravan moved on, the girl's cries fading as she was bound and thrown into a wagon. Clara's mind raced. She couldn't save everyone, not yet, but the girl's bravery stirred something in her. It was a reminder of Tagka, of the innocence she was fighting for. She adjusted her plan. She would follow the caravan to its next stop, a watering hole a mile ahead, where the riders would likely rest. The terrain there was rougher, with clusters of junipers and rocky outcrops offering cover for an ambush. She would strike at midnight, when the guards were tired and the captives unguarded. Clara crept through the canyon, her movements silent as a shadow. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust, the stars piercing the darkening sky like pinpricks of hope. She remembered her father's stories of Lakota warriors, men and women who fought not for glory but for their people. Clara had never felt like a warrior, only a survivor, but tonight she would have to be both. Her explosive was tucked into her belt, its weight a constant reminder of the destruction she was about to unleash. She wondered if her mother would approve, or if the spirits would judge her for the blood she would spill. The knife she carried, still stained with Silas's blood, felt like a curse, a reminder of the line she had crossed. The watering hole was a shallow pool fed by a sluggish stream, surrounded by sparse grass and twisted trees. The caravan halted, the riders dismounting with weary grunts. Clara hid behind a cluster of junipers, her eyes scanning the wagons. The captives were kept in the middle one, their muffled sobs barely audible over the crackle of the campfire. She counted 10 guards, all armed with rifles and revolvers, their spurs clinking as they moved. Amos Creed sat by the fire, his back to her, sipping from a silver flask. His confidence infuriated her, but it also gave her an edge. He didn't know she was coming. As the hours passed, the camp quieted. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their steps sluggish, their lanterns casting flickering shadows. Clara waited until the moon was high, its pale light illuminating the camp in a ghostly glow. She crawled to the lead wagon, her heart hammering as she cut the ropes securing her explosive. The tin can was crude, packed with gunpowder scavenged from a raided trader's cart. She had tested a smaller version days ago, blowing a stump to splinters. This one was larger, riskier, but it was her only chance. Her hands shook as she lit the fuse, the hiss of burning powder loud in her ears. She rolled the can under the wagon and sprinted for cover, her breath ragged. The explosion was deafening, a roar that split the night like thunder. The lead wagon erupted in a fireball, splinters and metal flying in all directions. Horses screamed, rearing in panic, as the riders scrambled for their weapons. Clara didn't wait. She fired her revolver, the first shot dropping a guard before he could raise his rifle. The second caught another in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. The captive's screams mixed with the chaos, and Clara saw her chance. She ran to the middle wagon, her knife slashing through the canvas with desperate precision. Inside, a dozen terrified faces stared back at her, their eyes wide with fear and hope. "Clara," a small voice whispered. "Tagka." His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, but he was alive. Clara's heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes, but there was no time for emotion. She cut his bonds and pulled him out, shouting, "Run! Follow me!" The other captives hesitated, frozen by fear, but the Lakota girl from earlier, Yag, grabbed a boy's hand and followed. Clara led them toward the junipers, her revolver covering their retreat. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing her arm, the pain sharp but distant. She fired back, her aim steady despite the blood soaking her sleeve. 3 captives fell behind, too weak to keep up, and Clara's stomach twisted. She couldn't save them all, not now. The group reached a narrow ravine, its steep walls offering temporary cover. Clara turned to Yag, whose beaded necklace glinted in the moonlight. "Stay with Tagka," she ordered, her voice hoarse. "I'll hold them off." Yag nodded, her small frame trembling but resolute. Tagka clung to Clara's hand, his voice breaking. "Don't leave me again." "I won't," Clara promised, though doubt gnawed at her. She reloaded her revolver, her last 3 bullets a grim reminder of her odds. The sound of hoof beats grew closer, the Black Spurs regrouping for pursuit. Clara braced herself, her back against the ravine wall, when a new figure emerged from the shadows. A woman older, with a weathered face and a rifle slung over her shoulder, stepped into the moonlight. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady. "Name's Mary. Let's get these kids out of here." Clara stared, torn between distrust and desperation. Mary was a settler, her kind often complicit in the Black Spurs' crimes. But her eyes held no malice, only resolve. Clara nodded, and together they braced for the fight. The ravine echoed with the thunder of hooves, and Clara knew this was only the beginning. The Black Spurs would not stop, and neither would she. For Tagka, for Yag, for the family she had lost, Clara would fight until her last breath. The night stretched on, a crucible of fire and blood. Clara's journey had begun with a single act of violence. But now it was something more, a fight not just for revenge, but for the future. As she stood shoulder to shoulder with Mary, Tagka and Yag huddled behind her, Clara felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was enough to keep her going. The Black Spurs were coming, and Clara was ready. But the fight was far from over. The ravine was a temporary refuge, not a sanctuary. Clara knew the Black Spurs would track them, their numbers and resources far greater than her own. She glanced at Tagka, his small frame shivering in the cold, and Yag, whose defiance had not wavered despite the terror in her eyes. Mary, too, was an unknown Quantitia settler who claimed to be an ally, but whose motives Clara could not fully trust. The weight of their survival rested on her shoulders, and Clara felt the burden like a physical thing, pressing against her chest. She led the group deeper into the ravine, the moonlight barely penetrating its narrow walls. The air was cool, damp with the scent of earth and stone. Clara's arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, but she ignored it, focusing on the path ahead. The ravine would lead to a forested ridge, a place where she had hidden supplies weeks ago, a small cache of food, water, and ammunition. If they could reach it, they might survive the night. But the Black Spurs were relentless, and Clara knew they would not let their captives go so easily. Mary kept pace beside her, her rifle at the ready. "I've seen what they do," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the crunch of their footsteps. "Lost my husband to their kind. They took my boys, too. I ain't got much left, but I'll fight for these kids." Clara studied her, searching for deception. Mary's face was lined with grief, her eyes carrying the same weight Clara saw in her own reflection. "Why help us?" Clara asked, her voice sharp. "Because it's right," Mary replied simply, "and because I know what it's like to lose everything." Clara wanted to believe her, but trust was a luxury she could not afford. Still, she needed Mary's help, at least for now. The group moved in silence, the children's fear palpable. Tagka clung to Clara's side, his hand small and cold in hers. Wygag walked with her head high, her necklace a quiet. The ravine's walls loomed like silent sentinels. As Clara led her small group deeper into its shadowed depths, the moonlight barely piercing the narrow passage, her arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, a dull ache that pulsed with every step. But she pushed the pain aside. Taka's hand trembled in hers, his small frame shivering in the cold Montana night. Wygag walked close behind, her beaded necklace glinting faintly, her defiance a quiet fire despite the fear in her eyes. Mary, the settler woman who had appeared at the last moment, kept pace with her rifle at the ready, her weathered face set in grim determination. The thunder of hooves from the Black Spurs' pursuit had faded, but Clara knew it was only a matter of time before the outlaws regrouped and came for them again. The explosion at the watering hole had bought them a fleeting chance, but it had also cost Clara dearly. Her revolver held only 3 bullets, and her crude explosive was gone, its tin can reduced to ash in the wreckage of the lead wagon. The Black Spurs, led by the ruthless Amos Creed, would not forgive her for the chaos she had wrought. They had lost a wagon, supplies, and at least 2 men, but their numbers were still overwhelming. Clara's only hope was to reach the forested ridge a mile ahead, where she had hidden a small cache of supplies weeks ago, dried meat, a canteen of water, and a handful of bullets. If they could make it there, they might survive the night. If not, the Black Spurs would show no mercy. The air in the ravine was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and stone. Clara's boots crunched softly on the gravel, her senses attuned to every sound. Taka's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting monsters to emerge. Wygag, though younger, seemed steadier, her small hands clenched into fists. Mary's presence was both a comfort and a complication. Clara didn't trust settlers too many had stood by as her people's lands were stolen, their lives erased. But Mary's words at the watering hole, her claim of losing her husband and sons to the Black Spurs, carried a weight that Clara couldn't ignore. For now, they were allies, bound by necessity. "We need to move faster," Clara whispered, her voice low but urgent. "The ridge is close, but they'll be tracking us by dawn." Mary nodded, her eyes scanning the ravine's walls. "I know these parts. There's a shortcut through a dry creek bed, cuts the distance in half. Risky, thou poppin' ground, no cover." Clara weighed the options. The ravine offered protection, but was slow going, its twists and turns delaying their escape. The creek bed would expose them, but speed was their only advantage. "Show me," she said, her tone clipped. Mary led the way, veering left toward a narrow gap in the ravine wall. The children followed, Tagga clutching Clara's hand so tightly it hurt. The creek bed was a shallow trench, its banks lined with brittle grass and scattered rocks. The moonlight cast long shadows, turning every boulder into a potential ambush. Clara's heart pounded as they moved, her revolver drawn, her eyes flicking to every rustle of wind. Tagga stumbled, his small frame weakened by months in captivity, and Clara caught him before he fell. "Stay strong," she murmured, her voice softer than she intended. "We're almost there." Wygag glanced at her, her dark eyes searching. "Why do they hate us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did we do?" Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to shield the girl from the truth, but Wygag's question demanded honesty. "They don't hate us," Clara said, her voice low. "They want our land, our lives, to make themselves rich. We're just in their way." Wygag's jaw tightened, her small hand touching the beaded necklace at her throat. "My mother said the spirits would protect us." Clara wanted to believe it, but the spirits had been silent when her village burned. "Then we'll protect each other," she said, meeting Wygag's gaze. The girl nodded, her resolve strengthening Clara's own. They reached the ridge as the first light of dawn tinged the sky. The forest was dense, a tangle of pines and junipers that offered cover, but also hid dangers. Clara led them to a hollowed-out tree stump where she had buried her supplies. Concealed under a layer of dirt and leaves, she dug with her knife, her hands shaking from exhaustion, and unearthed a small bundle, a leather pouch with dried venison, a canteen half full of water, and 6 bullets wrapped in cloth. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them alive for now. Mary knelt beside her, her rifle resting across her knees. "You've done this before," she said, her tone more observation than question. Hiding, fighting, surviving. Clara didn't look at her. Had to, she said, loading the bullets into her revolver. After they took my family, I learned fast. Mary's eyes softened, but she didn't press. My boys were taken a year ago, she said quietly. Jacob and Eli, 10 and 12. The Black Spurs burned our farm when my husband fought back. I've been tracking them ever since. Clara paused, the weight of Mary's words settling over her. She wanted to ask why Mary hadn't fought harder, why she hadn't saved her sons. But the accusation died in her throat. She knew the cost of fighting, the toll it took. We'll find them, she said instead, the words a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The group rested briefly, sharing the venison and water. Tagka ate greedily, his hunger a stark reminder of his suffering. Wygag sat close to him, her small hand resting on his shoulder. Clara watched them, her heart aching. They were so young, yet already scarred by the West's cruelty. She wondered what kind of life she could give them, if they survived this. The sound of hoof beats shattered the silence. Clara's head snapped up, her revolver drawn in an instant. Mary grabbed her rifle, motioning for the children to hide behind a fallen log. The hoof beats grew louder, accompanied by the clink of spurs and the low murmur of voices. Clara peered through the trees, her stomach twisting as she counted 8 riders approaching, their black spurs gleaming. Amos Creed wasn't among them, but his second in command. A weary man named Holt with a scar across his cheek led the group. Clara recognized him from the night her village Bernade had been the one to drag Tagka away. They're close, Mary whispered, her voice steady. We can't outrun them. Clara's mind raced. The ridge offered cover, but the riders were too many, and her ammunition was limited. She could fight, but it would risk the children. Her eyes fell on a rocky outcrop above the trail, its loose stones precarious. An idea formed, dangerous but possible. Mary, can you draw their fire? She asked, her voice low. Mary nodded, understanding immediately. I'll keep them busy. You do what you need to. Clara turned to Tagka and Wygag. Stay here. Don't move unless I call you. Tagka's eyes widened, but Wygag gripped his hand, her resolve steadying him. Clara crept toward the outcrop, her knife in one hand, her revolver in the other. The stones were heavy, some as large as her head, but she could move them with effort. If she could trigger a rock slide, it might block the trail, slowing the riders and giving her group a chance to escape. Mary positioned herself behind a tree, her rifle aimed at the approaching riders. She fired a single shot, the crack echoing through the forest. The riders shouted, their horses rearing as they scattered for cover. Clara worked quickly, prying stones loose with her knife, her muscles straining. The first stone fell, then another, tumbling down the slope with a low rumble. She pushed harder, her breath coming in gasps, until a cascade of rocks roared down the trail, kicking up dust and debris. The riders cursed, their horses panicking as the rock slide blocked their path. Holt shouted orders, his voice sharp with fury. Find them. They can't be far. Clara seized the moment, sprinting back to the children and Mary. Move, she hissed, leading them deeper into the forest. The riders were delayed, but not stopped. Clara knew they would find a way around, and Holt was not a man to give up easily. The group pushed through the forest, branches snagging at their clothes, the air thick with the scent of pine and fear. Clara's arm burned, the graze now a steady throb, but she ignored it. Tagka struggled to keep up, his small legs faltering, and Clara scooped him into her arms, his weight a burden she welcomed. Wygag stayed close, her eyes scanning the trees, her courage a quiet strength. Mary brought up the rear, her rifle ready, her steps sure despite the exhaustion etched into her face. They reached a small clearing as the sun climbed higher, its light filtering through the canopy. Clara set Tagka down, her arms aching. We need to rest, she said, her voice hoarse. Just for a moment. Mary shook her head. They're still coming. I heard them behind us. Clara cursed under her breath. The Black Spurs were relentless, their greed and cruelty driving them like a pack of wolves. She scanned the clearing, her eyes landing on a narrow path leading to a rocky bluff. It was defensible, with high ground and a clear view of the forest below. We make a stand there, she said, pointing. If they come, we'll be ready. Mary nodded, her expression grim. "I've got 8 rounds left." "You." "3," Clara said, her stomach sinking. "We'll have to make them count." They moved to the bluff, the children huddling behind a cluster of boulders. Clara showed Yag how to hold her knife, its blade small but sharp. "Only use it if you have to," she said, her voice firm. Yag nodded, her small hands steady. Tagka watched, his eyes wide with fear, but he said nothing, his trust in Clara absolute. The riders appeared minutes later, their spurs clinking as they dismounted and spread out through the forest. Holt led them, his scarred face twisted with rage. Clara crouched behind a boulder, her revolver aimed at the trail below. Mary took position beside her, her rifle steady. The children were silent, their breathing shallow. Clara's heart pounded, her mind racing with possibilities. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but she had fought against worse odds and survived. Holt's voice carried through the trees. "Come out, girl. You can't hide forever. Give us the kids, and maybe we let you live." Clara's jaw clenched. She knew his promises were empty, his cruelty boundless. She glanced at Mary, who gave a slight nod, her finger on the trigger. Clara took a deep breath, her prayer to waken Tanka a silent plea for strength. Then she stood, her revolver aimed at Holt's chest. "You want them," she called, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "Come and take them." The first shot came from Mary, her rifle cracking as a rider fell, clutching his leg. Clara fired, her bullet catching another in the shoulder. The riders returned fire, bullets ricocheting off the boulders, dust and stone fragments filling the air. Clara ducked, her heart racing as she reloaded her last bullet. Mary fired again, her aim true, but the riders were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. Yag screamed as a bullet grazed the boulder beside her, and Clara's blood ran cold. She grabbed the girl, pulling her down, her body shielding both children. Mary cursed, her rifle clicking empty. The riders were nearly upon them, their shouts growing louder. Clara's mind raced, searching for a way out. The bluff was a trap, their position exposed. She had to act, or they would all die. "Stay here," she whispered to the children, her voice fierce. She turned to Mary. "Cover me." Mary nodded, grabbing a rock to use as a weapon. Clara crept along the bluff's edge, her knife in one hand, her revolver in the other. She spotted Holt below, his back to her as he barked orders. It was a chance, slim but real. She moved silently, her years in the wilderness honing her stealth. She reached a ledge above him, her heart pounding as she aimed her revolver. One bullet, one shot. She fired. The bullet struck Holt's shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain. The riders froze, their attention on their leader. Clara didn't hesitate. She leapt from the ledge, her knife flashing as she tackled Holt to the ground. They struggled, his strength greater but his wounds slowing him. Clara drove her knee into his chest, her knife at his throat. "Where's Amos Creed?" she demanded, her voice a growl. Holt laughed, blood staining his teeth. "You'll never stop him, savage. He's coming for you." Clara pressed the knife harder, drawing blood. "Tell me, or you die." Before Holt could answer, a shout from Mary broke her focus. "Clara, behind you." Clara spun, her knife slashing as another rider lunged at her. The blade caught his arm, but he was stronger, his fist slamming into her jaw. She stumbled, her vision blurring, but she held onto her knife, driving it into his side. He fell, gasping, as Clara scrambled to her feet. The remaining riders were closing in, their guns drawn. Mary fired a rock, striking one in the head, buying Clara a moment to retreat. She grabbed Holt's fallen revolver, its chamber still holding for bullets, and ran back to the bluff. The children were safe, but Mary was pinned down, a rider advancing on her. Clara fired, dropping him, but the effort cost her. A bullet grazed her leg, the pain searing. She stumbled, her vision swimming, but she reached Mary, pulling her behind the boulders. "We can't hold them," Mary gasped, her face pale. "There's too many." Clara's eyes darted to the children, their faces etched with terror. She had promised Tagka she wouldn't leave him, but staying meant death. The forest stretched beyond the bluff, its depths offering a chance at escape. "We run," she said, her voice firm. Now. They fled, the children stumbling but moving, Mary supporting Clara as her leg burned. The riders pursued, their shouts echoing through the trees. Clara's mind raced, her body screaming for rest, but she pushed on, driven by the need to protect Tagka and Yag. The forest was their only hope, its shadows a refuge from the Black Spurs' wrath. Hours later, they collapsed in a hidden grove, the riders' pursuit lost in the maze of trees. Clara's leg was bleeding, her arm a mass of pain, but they were alive. Tagka clung to her, his tears soaking her shirt. Yag sat silently, her necklace clutched in her hand. Mary tended to Clara's wounds, her hands steady despite her own exhaustion. "We can't keep running," Mary said, her voice low. "They'll find us." Clara nodded, her mind racing. She had wounded Holt, but Amos Creed was still out there, his shadow looming over them. The Black Spurs would not stop until they were dead or recaptured. Clara looked at Tagka, his small face a mirror of her own determination. She had saved him once, but the fight was far from over. She needed a plan, a way to strike back before Creed could tighten his grip. As the sun set, casting the grove in twilight, Clara made a decision. She would take the fight to the Black Spurs, find their stronghold, and end their reign of terror. It was a reckless plan, one that might cost her everything, but she had no choice. For Tagka, for Yag, for the family she had lost, she would become the hunter, not the hunted. The grove was a fragile sanctuary, its dense pines cloaking Clara and her small band in shadow as the Montana sun dipped below the horizon. Clara's leg burned where a bullet had grazed her, the wound seeping through the makeshift bandage Mary had tied. Her arm, scored by an earlier shot, throbbed in time with her racing heart. Tagka huddled against her, his 12-year-old frame trembling, his eyes searching hers for reassurance. Yag sat nearby, her small hands clutching her beaded necklace, her defiance tempered by exhaustion. Mary, the settler woman who had become an unlikely ally, knelt beside Clara, her weathered hands cleaning the wound with a strip of cloth torn from her skirt. The Black Spurs were out there, their pursuit relentless, and Clara knew their time was running out. The fight at the bluff had been a desperate stand, wounding Holt, the Black Spurs' brutal second in command, but it had not stopped them. Amos Creed, the man who had orchestrated the destruction of Clara's family and countless others, was still alive, his shadow looming over the plains like a vulture circling carrion. Clara had vowed to take the fight to him, to find the Black Spurs' stronghold and end their reign of terror. It was a reckless plan, born of desperation and defiance, but it was the only path left. She had saved Tagka once, and she would not let him fall back into Creed's hands. For him, for Yag, for the Lakota heritage that burned in her blood, Clara would become the hunter. The grove was silent save for the rustle of leaves and the distant howl of a coyote. Clara's revolver, now loaded with 4 bullets scavenged from Holt's fallen weapon, felt heavy in her hand. Her knife, stained with the blood of her enemies, was tucked into her belt. Mary's rifle had only 3 rounds left, and their supplies-juried venison and a half-empty canteen would not last beyond tomorrow. The children were weak, their bodies worn from captivity and flight, but their spirits held firm. Taka's trust in Clara was unwavering, and Yag's courage, despite her youth, was a spark that refused to die. "We can't stay here," Clara said, her voice low but resolute. "Creed will send more men. We need to find their camp, hit them before they hit us." Mary's eyes narrowed, her hands pausing over Clara's wound. "You're talking about walking into a lion's den with a pocket knife. Their strongholds in Ironwood, surrounded by walls and men. We're for against dozens." Clara met her gaze, unflinching. "I've faced worse odds. If we keep running, we're dead. We take the fight to them, we have a chance." Taka's voice broke the tension, small but steady. "I don't want to run anymore, Clara. I want to fight." Clara's heart ached at his words. He was too young for this, too young to carry the weight of their world. But the West had stolen his childhood. She squeezed his hand, her voice soft. "You stay with me, Tagka. We'll do this together." Yag nodded, her small jaw set. "I can help. I'm not afraid." Mary sighed, her shoulders sagging. "You're all crazy, but I'm in. For my boys, for these kids, I'll fight." Clara's plan was forming, pieced together from rumors and her own knowledge of the land. Ironwood was a fortified town, built on stolen Lakota territory. its brothels and saloons a hub for the Black Spurs operations. Creed's stronghold was a converted trading post, surrounded by a wooden palisade and guarded by his most loyal men. Clara had heard whispers of a hidden tunnel, used by traders to smuggle goods, that might lead inside. If they could find it, they could slip past the defenses and strike at Creed directly. It was a long shot, but long shots were all they had. The group moved at dusk, the forest shadows their only cover. Clara led, her senses honed by years in the wilderness. Tagka and Wygyag followed, their steps light but unsteady, while Mary brought up the rear, her rifle ready. The path to Ironwood was treacherous, winding through rocky hills and open plains where the Black Spurs scouts could spot them. Clara kept them off the main trails, moving through thickets and dry washes, her eyes scanning for signs of pursuit. The children were silent, their fear palpable, but they trusted her, and that trust was a weight she carried with pride and dread. As they neared Ironwood, the landscape changed. The plains gave way to ramshackle buildings, their wooden frames weathered by wind and time. The town loomed in the distance, its palisade a dark silhouette against the starry sky. Clara's heart pounded as she spotted campfires dotting the outskirts, the Black Spurs patrols keeping watch. She led the group to a low hill overlooking the town, its vantage point offering a view of the stronghold. The trading post was a squat, fortified building, its walls studded with rifle slits. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their spurs clinking, their lanterns casting pools of light. There, Mary whispered, pointing to a dry creek bed snaking toward the town's edge. That's where the tunnel might be. Traders used it to avoid taxes. Clara nodded, her mind racing. The creek bed was exposed, but the darkness would help. We move now, before they tighten their patrols. Mary, you and the kids stay here until I signal. Mary's eyes widened. You're going alone? I'm faster on my own, Clara said, her tone firm. If I don't come back, get them to safety. Tagka grabbed her arm, his voice trembling. Don't leave me, Clara. She knelt, cupping his face. I'm coming back, Tagka. I promise. The words felt like a lie, but she forced a smile, her heart breaking at his fear. Wygyag stepped forward, her necklace glinting. I'll watch him, she said, her voice steady. Go. Clara nodded, her throat tight. She crept down the hill, her knife and revolver ready, her movements silent as a shadow. The creek bed was narrow, its banks crumbling, but it led to a rusted grate, half buried in the earth. Clara pried it open with her knife, the metal groaning softly. Inside was a tunnel, its walls damp and lined with roots. She crawled through, the darkness swallowing her, her breath shallow. The tunnel smelled of mold and earth, its confines pressing against her like a grave. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a storage room beneath the trading post. Crates of whiskey and ammunition lined the walls, their labels faded. Clara's heart raced as she heard voices above, the muffled laughter of men unaware of her presence. She found a ladder leading to a trapdoor and climbed, her knife between her teeth. The trapdoor opened into a dimly lit hallway, its walls hung with pelts and weapons. Clara moved silently, her senses alert, until she reached a heavy door. Beyond it, she heard Amos Creed's voice, smooth and commanding. We move the captives at dawn, he said. The buyers in Denver are waiting. Double the guards tonight. That Lakota girls caused enough trouble. Clara's blood ran cold. She had to act now, before the captives were moved. She slipped back to the tunnel, crawling to the creek bed to signal Mary and the children. A single whistle, low and sharp, brought them running. Mary's face was pale but resolute, Tagka and Wygyag clinging to her. It's real, Clara whispered. The tunnel leads inside. We can get to Creed. Mary's eyes narrowed. And then what? We're still outnumbered. We don't need to fight them all, Clara said. We take Creed, the rest will scatter. The group entered the tunnel, moving in single file. Tagka's breathing was ragged, but he kept pace, his trust in Clara unwavering. Wygyag's small hand brushed the walls, her courage a quiet strength. Mary carried her rifle, her steps steady despite the fear in her eyes. The storage room was as Clara had left it, the trapdoor still open. They climbed into the hallway, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and sweat. Clara led them to the heavy door, her revolver drawn, her heart pounding. She pushed the door open, revealing a large room lit by lanterns. Amos Creed stood at a table, studying a map, surrounded by 6 men. His gray eyes snapped up as Clara entered, his hand reaching for his pistol. "You," he snarled, recognition flashing across his face. The Lakota girl. Clara aimed her revolver at his chest. "Let the captives go, Creed, or you die." The men drew their weapons, but Clara's voice was steady. "One move, and he's dead." Creed laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a savage with a gun." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger, her rage a living thing. "You took my family. You took everything. This ends tonight." Before Creed could respond, a shout came from the hallway. More guards, alerted by the noise, were coming. Mary fired her rifle, dropping one as he entered, but the others returned fire, bullets splintering the doorframe. Clara pushed Tagka and Wygyag behind a crate, her revolver barking as she shot another guard. The room erupted in chaos, gunfire, and shouts filling the air. Creed lunged for cover, his pistol firing. A bullet grazed Clara's shoulder, the pain sharp but distant. She returned fire, her last bullet missing as Creed dove behind the table. Mary was pinned down, her rifle empty, her hands clutching a broken chair leg. Tagka screamed as a guard grabbed him, and Clara's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. She tackled the guard, her knife sinking into his arm, freeing Tagka. Wygyag threw a lantern, its oil igniting as it shattered, flames licking the walls. The fire spread, smoke choking the room. Clara grabbed Tagka and Wygyag, pulling them toward the hallway. Mary followed, her face bloodied from a stray bullet. They reached the storage room, the trapdoor still open, but the flames were close, the heat searing. Clara pushed the children through the tunnel, her heart racing as the stronghold burned above them. Mary hesitated, her eyes on the crates of ammunition. "We can use this," she said, grabbing a small keg of gunpowder. Clara nodded, her mind racing. They crawled through the tunnel, the keg heavy in Mary's arms. The creek bed was empty, the guards distracted by the fire. Clara led them to a nearby barn, its doors ajar, where the captives were held. She cut their bonds, freeing a dozen men, women, and children, including the boys who ran to Mary, their faces lighting with recognition. "Jacob, Eli," she cried, her voice breaking. The group fled into the night, the stronghold's flames lighting the sky. Clara's wounds burned, her strength fading, but she pushed on, Tagka and Wygyag at her side. They reached a hidden valley as dawn broke, its meadows blooming with wildflowers. A Lakota elder, a medicine woman named Singing Crow, greeted them, her eyes warm with recognition. She had known Clara's mother, had taught her the old ways. The valley was a refuge, a place to heal. Clara collapsed, her wounds too much to bear. Singing Crow tended to her, her hands gentle, her prayers a soothing balm. Tagka and Wygyag stayed close, their faces etched with hope. Mary reunited with her sons, her grief replaced by joy. The captives, free at last, began to rebuild, their voices rising in song. Clara recovered slowly, her body scarred but her spirit renewed. She buried her revolver, its weight no longer needed. She taught Tagka and Wygyag the Lakota stories, the Bible's verses, and how to plant wildflowers, their colors a testament to resilience. The valley became a home, a place where the past could heal and the future could grow. The Black Spurs were gone, their stronghold reduced to ash, Amos Creed's body found in the wreckage. Clara had won, not with vengeance, but with courage and sacrifice. She had become a protector, a guardian of her people's heritage and the innocent lives she had saved. Thank you for reading Clara's Redemption. This story explores the harsh realities of violence and injustice in the American West, raising questions about the cost of survival and the morality of fighting back. Was Clara's use of violence justified to save her brother and others? Can justice ever be achieved in a world driven by greed and cruelty? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters. Let us know where you stand on these themes and what they mean to you. Engage with us to keep this story's impact alive and help others discover it.